in case you would like one. Because you printed way too many, so you're welcome to take them.
I can already hear.
Like all the newsy stuff. And this is not like she was like, I don't need new. I was like, fair enough, fair enough. But
I thought she was going to say because it's going to make us feel sorry.
no, someone decided no one has time to do this, so she was saying, we're not gonna.
So it's 7:02, so we should probably get ourselves going.
Do you want us in any particular seat?
Whichever,
Shall we put the rows between two barns?
well, so sit right there.
Sitting on my phone.
Friends, good evening and welcome. You are really in the ground floor. We have done many great things in our combined Woodbury, Southbury interfaith community over the years. And our congregations have worked together on all sorts of projects over the years and have studied together over the years. But the idea of having a full study session, bringing in all of our congregations together, I can tell you, looking back over the last 30 years, tonight is the first time. And so it really is extraordinary. Or you can say, so long overdue. We are also so fortunate this evening because I'm Rabbi Eric Polikoff from B'nai Israel, the Reverend Brian Bott from Woodbury United Methodist Church, and the Reverend Abigail Johnson from St. James Lutheran Church we're all joining together this evening for a co-teaching and a processing together a text that is sacred to Christians and to Jews. And we also thank the tens of thousands who are joining us online as well. And we welcome you as well this evening. We're going to go over first a little bit of background and context into the story of the Golden Calf, and we're going to read a segment, not the full story, but a segment of it, and then we're going to offer a variety of understandings, Jewish and Christian, and you'll see oftentimes shared Jewish and Christian understandings, as well as some thoughts about, and for us to process about, the relevance of this story for our time, for today. So ever so quickly as background, And chances are you're familiar with this part of the background of the story. So one, Moses helps to free the Israelites. Okay? We have Moses and we have Israel going free. Slaves in Egypt, they're freed. They arrive at Mount Sinai. There, they hear God's words, and among the words that they are told, actually sort of specifically twice, in two different ways, is essentially not to make graven images. And they will be commanded to build a sanctuary. Graven images bad, sanctuary good. Moses climbs to the top of the Mount Sinai to go up and to bring back the tablets. Moses is up there on the mountain, and this is now when everything goes all wrong. And so Pastor Abby is going to share specifically what happens now when Moses is up there on the mountain.
And I believe we're going to have the text on the screen, yes, as well. But also, it is good for us to hear and receive sacred words. So if it is more comfortable for you to read them, great. And if it is more comfortable for you to close your eyes or be in a posture where you're receiving them, that is welcomed as well. So this is coming from Exodus 32.
Whose translation?
What a great
This is the JPS.
Oh, okay. Okay.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Aaron said to them, "You men, take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Eternal." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and then rose to dance. The Eternal spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' The Eternal further said to Moses, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now, let me be. My anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." But Moses implored his eternal God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Eternal, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth.' Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and by your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever." And the Eternal renounced the punishment planned for God's people. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain, bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed in both their surfaces. They were inscribed on one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people in its boisterousness, he said to Moses, "There is a cry of war in the camp." But he answered, "It is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song I hear." As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged and hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it into powder and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you, that you have brought such great sin upon them?" Aaron said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil. They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us. For that fellow Moses, the man who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him.' So I went to them. 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' And they gave it to me and hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf."
So right before Pastor Abby read, Ron said, which translation? It's always a great question because every translation is going to have its limitations. And so, for example, there'll be two things which come up in this translation which are a bit limited. One is, it doesn't say in Hebrew, "make us a god." It says, "make us gods," plural. Secondly, it doesn't say dance. It says carouse. And so the picture which I think most people saw from Cecil B. DeMille, which we used to advertise this, they weren't dancing. And that picture was most accurate from essentially the Hebrew text. So a few things. First, motivation. The people fear that Moses is dead, and they need a leader and a direction. The commentators in Judaism, some are very harsh on the people, some are less so. So a very important medieval rabbi, Judah Halevi, said, "They were desperate to have a tangible object of worshiping like other nations without repudiating God who brought them out of Egypt." So that they said, "Come, let us, this is your God who brought you out of Egypt." That they wanted to stay in connection with God, but they needed a tangible object. He writes in the Kuzari, "Creation of a golden calf was not such a serious sin. After all, making of images or using them for worship was accepted religious practice during ancient times. God had commanded the people to create the cherubim and to place them above the ark." So in other words, God hasn't called for images to be there in the Bible, in the Torah. God had done so. If the people made a mistake, it was not refusing to worship God, but in their impatience. Instead of waiting for the return of Moses or a message from God, they took matters into their own hands and acted as if they had been commanded to replace their leader with a golden idol. It was for their impatience, not for creating an idol, that they were punished. That's the view of a very great sage, Rabbi Judah Halevi. They couldn't comprehend a God without physical form, as the second commandment had told them to do. And so he's arguing that they're not guilty of actual idolatry, but merely of wishing to facilitate their worship of God through material symbols. A very famous rabbi of past years, Rabbi Kushner, who wrote, among other things, when bad things happen to good people. He refers to the Midrash. Midrash is the rabbinic commentaries from about 2,000 years ago. And he says, the Midrash compares the situation to that of a man who brought his son, who bought his son a store in a notoriously corrupt neighborhood. So in other words, this guy sets up his son in business, but in the red light district. and then blames the son for having been corrupted there. They had just come from Egypt, where everything, even death, was rendered visible through pyramids and mummies. It was extremely hard for them to grasp the idea that the greatest reality of all is intangible. So this is sort of the case for the defense that, what do you expect from them? They're former slaves. This is all they knew. The case for the prosecution. Psalm 106. The creation and worship of the golden calf by the Israelites was a brazen act of disloyalty to the God who freed them from Egyptian bondage. And this is, again, from the Midrash. Worship of God without shape or form is very difficult. They wanted a God like the Egyptians, one that was carried from place to place. They sought to imitate the Egyptians. Now, in the passage which we also just heard as Pastor Rabbi was reading, there's the question of who's the guilty party here? As Jewish tradition understands it, first, you'll notice it said that the men gave their gold. It doesn't say that the women gave their gold. And so the men, not the women, were guilty of creating the idol and worshiping it. Aaron failed to provide an explanation to calm their fears. You can see Aaron throughout is a very passive figure. He's not being a leader. A little bit more about Aaron. The Midrash, again, the rabbis, contends that Hur was Moses' loyal assistant. So up until this story, we might not only read about Aaron, we might also read about another important person, and Joshua. We also might read about Hur, H-U-R. Ben-Hur is son of Hur, right? As the Israelites requested making a god, this is according to the Midrash, he said, you want to make a god? He called them brainless fools. And then they murdered him. And that's why, according to the rabbis, he's mentioned up until this story, he's not mentioned after the story. So in other words, clearly they murdered him in this story. It just, that part wasn't fully explicated. And Aaron saw this, and then they asked Aaron to do it, and Aaron saw what happened to her, and then Aaron acquiesces. Aaron was focused on maintaining peace. Perils of distorting truth for the sake of peace. He was willing to indulge idolatry in order to pacify the people, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. Aaron's guiding principle was peace at any price, compromise to avoid confrontation. He desperately wanted to be loved and to be popular. And as we read, out came this calf. He refused to take responsibility. Regarding the people, humans can act nobly at one moment and ugly at the next. The generation that heard the voice at Sinai could readily sink so low, writes a great biblical scholar, Nechama Leibowitz. Maybe it's because the people fall away from good intentions when they are confronted with the glitter of gold, says another commentator. Some historical context, which is from biblical scholarship, very important to understanding this story. A calf or young bull is a symbol of fertility in Canaan. The Canaanite god El was represented by a bull. Bull or other animals served as a pedestal on which the god stood, elevated above humankind. So if you're putting a bull on a pedestal, you're, as it were, that would be something which many would know all about. King Jeroboam, he's the first king in northern Israel. So after King Solomon, Judah and Israel split in two. The kingdom splits in half. In the northern kingdom, guess what they put on the altars? Golden calves. So, and the northern kingdom had an altar with two golden calves, one at Bethel and one at Dan. So the Exodus account is a projection backward of the sin onto the northern kingdom. writes the biblical scholar Everett Fox. So in other words, what's happening is they were doing that in the north, in the northern kingdom. And so what this story does is say what they're doing in the north is completely illegitimate. And that's another way of doing it. As for the potential actual sin, Robert Alter, he's a very famous contemporary scholar. The people have not liberated themselves from polytheistic notions. Rashi, this is the great rabbinical scholar, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzhak, says, he pulls out, make us many gods, that it was plural in Hebrew, that they were succumbing to polytheism. Alter writes, the golden calf, also writes, the golden calf is thus a kind of anti-tabernacle or anti-ark, meant for the same end by making the divine dwell among the people, but doing it in a prohibited fashion. So as I said at the beginning, the tabernacle, which they're going to create, good, the golden calf, bad. Leibowitz writes, the calf was forbidden because it was not made at the bidding of the Almighty. The cherubim were permitted because they were made in accordance with his wish. We must not be arbitrarily make his own, man must not, that's a typo, arbitrarily make his own laws, create his own ritual. This must be determined strictly in accordance to divine wishes, says Leibowitz. Could be that it's worshiping material things. What's the story about? Worshiping gold, worshiping material stuff. It could be trying to make God, who is infinite, who is beyond, into something limited, something that they could see, contain, control. Still, the decision against going into the land of Israel, that doesn't come in this story. There's a later story in Numbers. Our Torah story class is immersed in that story. What happens here is not as bad as what happens in the book of Numbers. So we might say it's bad, but there's far worse.
So it's wonderful to be with you. I'm Brian Boat, and I'm half-time at Woodbury United Methodist, and I want to thank many of you who supported us a year ago when we went through quite a hiccup in leadership, and I want to thank my members who are here tonight. The notes you're going to see are actually based on two things. They're based on some of Rabbi's scholarship as we began to prepare this seminar, and then they're also based on my own work, working also part-time at a congregational church in Fairfield where my eldest son and his family worship regularly. Yes, I am failing retirement. And the reason that's important is you're going to see references to the Reformed tradition and congregationalism, which is not
Oh, sure. You're welcome. Thanks for saying something. Better? Better? Better. Good. So the fault of many Protestants is that the sin of the golden calf is idolatry, making a great infamy in violation of his commandments. And but as Rabbi pointed out, that has been an accepted religious practice in ancient times, and in fact, about 2/3 of Christianity uses such objects today. The Orthodox Christian tradition has raised iconography to an art form. So, one question for us as moderns, and happy to Reverend Delphi to lead us into kind of more relevant questions about what this means for us today, but one question we might want to think about is, what are the objects of our idol worship? Another possible answer is fear. Moses was gone 40 days and 40 nights. Was he dead? Who would lead him now? Images provide guidance. Sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. And so what images today calm our fears, and what images fill us with fear? Is impatience a sin? I would take my jacket off, but it would take too long
speaker.
Another possible answer to the sin of the golden calf is that they were small-minded. Israelites couldn't comprehend the God without form. J.B. Phillips wrote a wonderful translation of the Bible. He also wrote a sermon, Your God is Too Small. And sometimes we, in our finitude as human beings,
Prime customer. Just put this in.
don't know how.
Well, it's just they're having trouble online.
Okay. Where would you like to put it? I think I got it. Is that close enough? Okay. All right. So one of the ways that we sin, or the sin of the golden calf, is that we make God too small. I mean, this is the God of all creation. This is the God who liberated the Israelites from Egyptian slavery. This is the God who parted the sea. This is the God who said, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, or mortals that you care for them, that yet you have made them a little less than God and crowned them with glory and honor, Psalm 8. So how do we make God too small? Disloyalty, they exchanged the glory of God for the image of an ox that eats grass. And I think a question for us is, when have we been disloyal, if we have been? And was there a benefit, and what was lost? Unbridled sexuality, licentiousness, and Rabbi has touched on some of the aspects of that. The word in Hebrew is a word that means to laugh in merriment or scorn. It's the same root as the name Isaac. And so the people, as it says in one translation, they rose up to play. I love this paraphrase from Eugene Peterson in The Message. The people sat down to eat and drink and then began to party. It was a wild party. Mardi Gras, Carnival, you name it. The text doesn't tell us why Aaron chose gold. Maybe available because the Israelites plundered the Egyptians. Maybe, as it has in most cultures, it represented wealth, power, or the acquisition of something scarce. Rabbi asked us when we were preparing this, did our traditions have any commentary on the 32nd chapter of Exodus? And I honestly didn't know, and I've been a Methodist my whole life, so I went online to look. John Wesley, if you've seen the Broadway musical Hamilton, you know there's a recurring theme where they say to him, why do you write like you're running out of time? That was John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. He took notes on everything. So when I looked it up, Rabbi, 8 pages of notes on Exodus 32. And the one that relates to this thing about material worship is just this. John Wesley said about Aaron, we do not find that he said one word to discountenance their proposal. Some suppose that when Aaron bid them break off their earrings, he did it with design to crush the proposal, believing that their covetousness would not allow them to give away their gold. Interesting thought. Along with the betrayal that we noted previously, of course, Exodus 20:23 says, you shall not make for yourselves gods of gold. So it's worth noting that the Israelites were willing to give us personal wealth for the creation of an idol that represented security. And as we watch what's happening in the markets, and some of us with our 401ks, our wealth sometimes makes us feel secure and sometimes creates the illusion of security. And then there's worth looking at the what the who of the golden calf, and we've talked quite a bit about poor Aaron. I just love this line. It's like classic not taking responsibility. Yeah, they gave me the gold. I threw it in the fire, and out came the calf. I didn't have anything to do with it, you know. And then the people were also complicit.
Fear can drive us to do crazy, inconsistent, inhumane, unethical things. And pent-up or unresolved anxiety can express itself in antisocial or destructive ways. And this is one that I struggle with, the kind of this last bullet point on the, despite all the spectacular demonstrations of the Lord's supreme power, if you go back and read the chapters leading up to chapter 32, chapter 16, chapter 17, chapter 19, leads them out of Egypt, provides water from the rock, provides manna, and so on and so forth. And yet still. So that will be my limit to my public confession tonight. Reverend? I want to give you the, Abby, you want this?
When we were preparing for this interfaith dialogue and study together, one of the things that we named very early on was the importance that it not just be a talking at you, but a talking with you, because all three of us greatly agreed that the beauty of coming together in community, whatever we're worshiping, however we're worshiping, and whatever traditions we're worshiping, that if those stay in our worship spaces, then where is the echo into our community? Where does our faith flow into the way that we live our lives outside of the spaces that we gather with like-minded people, and instead go out into the world where we experience the great diversity that God creates? And so in doing so tonight, we would like to take an opportunity to ask some questions and get the room talking. But before we do that, I want to create a little bit of time to ask if there are any questions for clarification or anything that came up either as we read the text or in the conversation kind of prompts that both Rabbi Eric and Reverend Brian offered. Yes. Do you want to?
And I'll repeat the question as well. What Larry, is this working? This is easier. So Larry's question, Larry did the homework, and part of the homework was to really check out this chapter. In this chapter, we did a segment specifically related to the sin, but that's not the whole chapter. And one of the things which happens in the chapter is that the Levites, who did not seem to participate in this, that the Levites go, Moses says, who's for God? And the Levites are right there. And in fact, they slaughter people. And we also didn't get to the point that the calf itself is ground into dust, and the people have to drink the concoction of it. It's like, as it were, drinking your words. That's also actually a little bit like there's a thing called the sotah, which we'll just, the suspected adulterous woman, where she has to drink this weird concoction as well. So there's a relationship between those two. But yeah, there are consequences here, and some of those consequences led to death. Yes, that is very much the case. There's also a plague. Thank you, Ron. The other thing which I would add is that in the rabbinic commentaries, it's actually a lot like John Wesley in that they also see when Aaron says, the holiday will be tomorrow, right? There's like postponing, he's stalling for time. Come back tomorrow. And similarly, give the gold so that, as it were, who's going to want to part with their gold? so that he was trying to avoid the catastrophe which indeed happened. And yes, there was a sense of consequences. There's probably one other thing going on as well, which is there's sort of biblical scholars will talk about rivalries, including between the Levites and the priests, the Kohanim. The priests are part of the Levite caste. The Levites are, the priests are at the top of that caste. Still, there was rivalry between the two. And is there something about that being reflected in that segment? Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I have many questions, but the first one, so it seems like there were lots of sins committed, but also the commandments haven't been brought down yet. So can they be held accountable for sins that they don't know they're committing?
What do you think?
I think that's a little unfair, but I also grew up knowing that like killing people is not so great. So some of it should be common sense too.
Do you have
And Janice's question, but wait a second, what do they have? For those who will prosecute, this comes as Pastor Brian said, after Exodus 19. So while you're going to say, but the rabbis teach there's no before and after in Torah, true, but for those who would prosecute, before this chapter, while they hadn't received the tablets, they had received the message. So they got the message earlier, and then sort of in Exodus 20, it's reiterated specifically about graven images. So when we first looked at this together, Pastor Abby's immediate response was to say, the first response of our textual tradition would be idolatry, plain and simple, end of story. And that would be why.
How come they chose a calf rather than any other animal or symbol?
I'm guessing. But they were influenced by Egypt, where they had been, and the Canaanite fertility god was also a calf, represented by a calf. So there, and remember, the text is written sometime after the events. So the experience of moving into Canaan and being influenced by Canaanite gods would also have been part of it. So both of those, I think.
Can I ask you a question back? Do you think today, what would the symbol be?
Maybe the Star of David?
She said maybe the Star of David.
I think there's sir, please. We're just going to hand you, CJ's going to hand you a microphone to.
There's this interesting, fascinating to me interplay when God first approaches Moses and says to him, those people you brought out of Egypt, right, are now doing this. And when Moses responds, he said, well, now God, those people you brought out of Egypt, right, it's kind of one of these. Do any of the scholars make any comments or thoughts about it? It's almost like don't hold me accountable.
I'll just say, from rabbinic text, absolutely, because God says your people, literally your people, Moses, as opposed to my people, and yes, that absolutely in the rabbinical tradition that strongly resonates with the fact that, as it were, everybody, even God, seems to be throwing the blame elsewhere, right? And so. Yeah.
Our children, and we say to our partner's spouse, you know what your son did today?
Exactly.
There's also a theory of thought in coming to scripture within some Christian contexts about the idea of this sacred text being really a journal of our faith experiences. And so I think when I take that question and think about this dynamic that's happening between a human and the sacred, there's such a humanity, I feel like, that we can hear in that of within our own lives, these moments of kind of going back and forth with God and being called to some amount of accountability, and also having this very personal experience of being in conversation, not simply just kind of sending something up and having it be a one way, but this kind of contentious feeling of experiencing a true living eternal of God, which is kind of a beautiful thing, and letting this journal be so honest and authentic to what it is to be human with God. So, yeah. Yeah, often, yes. Yes. Thank you for passing the mic, by the way.
Moses, in spite of his extreme anger and smashing the stone, the tablets. I just think we need to explore anger. Is anger good? Is anger a bad thing? That trait. Love to hear your perspectives.
What do you mean? Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's nuanced, right? So there's a place for righteous anger. There's a place for anger that is kindled because of the abuse of people, systems that oppress and isolate. But there's also anger that is reactive, that really is a way to vent our spleen. I don't think that's holy anger. I don't think that's God anger. I think our frontal cortexes probably need to do more work than they sometimes do. I'll just speak personally on that. So in terms of God forgiving Moses, I mean, it's pretty clear from the beginning of Exodus that Moses has a special place. For however that has come to be, Moses was chosen. And I guess that's the other piece of the answer. It doesn't answer the question about anger.
Oh, gee. Oh, what a shame.
Of all of the violence and the hard-heartedness and then the liberation. So it's sort of hard to believe that there would be this moment where he's like shocked to discover that this has been going on while he's chatting with Moses up on Mount Sinai, because he's been the mastermind of everything. So why would we believe that he didn't know that this was like, why would he be shocked? He's not shocked by anything.
Try this one. I think that one might not be as good as this.
Do not broadcast the it'll actually have to.
I would just like to throw out that maybe in the end, this was all really a test.
when we carry into our theological conversations or spiritual questions a compassionate curiosity about God, knowing that we don't understand how it all works. One of the things my professor had said when this idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful God came into play, and oftentimes we in Christian spaces will refer to the text that says, for I have plans for you. And my professor said, God has plans for me. I have plans for me too. My life doesn't always go according to my plans, but I do make them. And I wonder if there isn't something in that for us too, that God makes plans and God knows. And does God's plans work out in the way, in the making of the plan versus the calculating and laying it out exactly accordingly? Is there a difference? Is there space for both to be true? Is there an experience of planning alongside God and hoping that it goes in that way, and also recognizing that life happens in the midst of our plans, perhaps in the midst of God's plans as well? And it's just an opening for wondering and thinking about, how does God get surprised? And is God teaching us a lesson, or is God feeling this emotion genuinely as well? And what does that look like for us? It's a good point to ponder and wonder how God also meets us in our surprise.
There's a question online for Pastor Brian. Is it Methodist teaching that the Israelites plundered the Egyptians? The microphones aren't working, so you can.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is it Methodist teaching that the Israelites plundered the Egyptians? And I don't know the answer to that, even though I'm Methodist. I'd have to go back and look at Wesley's notes. What I would say is that, as I've read the text, as the Israelites are leaving, they are given the gold that the Israelites had, and whether, I may have misspoken about plunder, but
or according to a lot of the sort of the stuff I've read, not at all. Plunder is one way. There's another word which we can use, which is reparations. And that what happens is, and that I guess to the point regarding God sort of masterminding all of this, to your point, at the burning bush, God says to Moses, oh, and by the way, they're going to strip the Egyptians. And so that the idea that there's going to be all sorts of valuables, which will also come out of Egypt, is part and parcel of the actual plan. And so yes, and in fact, the Hebrew terms, it relates to doing that. But one, it explains why you have all this gold there in the first place with them in the wilderness. But it's also a question of and actually I should say that what happens is that the Israelites and this was the Israelite women went to their neighbors and asked to borrow things, and at part the Egyptians, who this was right amidst a terrible plague, and they didn't know how it was going to end. So it was like, you want, here, take, and so the type of suffering of slavery, that there should be some consequence for the slaveholders amidst that, so it seemed in biblical understandings to be very, very legitimate.
Can you give us the time frame? You might have mentioned it earlier, that things devolved to the degree that they did, that humans put together this plan to go down this road that was so opposite of everything that they should have been doing. I mean, how could man, meaning group of people, devolve that fast and put together this plan that is so opposite? What was that time frame?
Are you reflecting on the last 100 days? You know.
You are capable. So, yeah, according to rabbinic lore, this happens on the 9th of Av. And 40 days after the 9th of Av is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so, as we wanted to see it, again, this is sort of Jewish mindset, is that there are times when we do bad things or bad things happen, and then there's a period of time where we can atone for that and have that atonement accepted. The text suggests that this all happened because Moses was late coming down the mountain, as in that day. So one of the understandings in the Midrash is that they miscounted the days. And so, but again, that gets to what Pastor can tell you all about and being impatient.
But I do think it's a really great question to bring us into that conversation of taking this out into the world, this idea of how could things fall apart so fast? Is such an honest and a worthwhile question for us to be asking ourselves. And in the midst of asking that question, then also ask, and this is a way of reading text that I often do with youth and children in our context, is asking them, and where are you in this story? Which character are you, or we're asking them, if you're Aaron in this story, what does it mean to be looking for peace at any cost? In our Lutheran tradition, Martin Luther writes about costly grace versus cheap grace. This idea that when we truly experience grace in the world and grace from God, there is a cost involved. And to assume that we're gonna smooth things over without any ripple effects or without any real kind of engagement from us is an idea of engaging with a cheap sense of grace versus something that really kind of propels our life and calls us to do something out in the world. Not because we've earned anything, but because this gift has been given to us, and therefore we're going to make sure that way of love and justice is seen out among us as well. And so I'm mindful too of time. And so what I would like to invite is, as you go out into the world this evening and into the days ahead, to ask yourself this question when revisiting Exodus 32 of where are we in this story? If we are Aaron in this story, watching things fall apart so quickly, and yet we are also called in a leadership way in whatever context we find ourselves in. What does it look like to not just go for peace by any means necessary, peace in the sense of kind of a calm, quiet, but rather a peace that is an active peace, as Martin Luther King Jr. would later write, an active engagement of peace, an active justice. Or if we are the people in this story, if we are the Israelites in this story, we are grappling with sin. What does it mean to have a sin of impatience? What does it mean to worship something material? What does it mean to have whatever? Brian, what were your other sins that you list down? Idolatry, fear, small-mindedness, disloyalty, unbridled sexuality, material worship. You know, Rabbi is correct when we started this conversation about what is the sin of the golden calf. My first thought was, well, I mean, in Sunday school, I was told idolatry, they're done. But it is so much bigger. And so if we are thinking of ourselves in this story, what are the different sins we are grappling with out in the world? What does it mean to have a sin of impatience? What does it mean to be out in the world and to value materialism before all else? And so while we won't have time to get into the weeds of that together here tonight, I do encourage all of you to find a space to ask those questions, whether it be in your own journal or in the car ride home tonight or with your communities of faith that you go back to. But how do we see ourselves in this story today? What are the sins that we are grappling with? How are we as leaders, hopefully not acting in such a way so passive, or just kind of wanting to smooth things out quietly without kind of being an example of good leadership and a good change in the world. So, yeah.
I want to thank the three of you for distilling this down into a really nice conversation that both gives us historical perspective as well as contemporary applications. I was amazed as I dove into this, and I don't attend all your study groups, but it was a lot of fun to dive into this. I was amazed at the number of scholarly documents that are out there on this chapter, coming from around the world, and it just blew me away. So what you did tonight was just fantastic for all of us.
We have to wait another 30 years.
Next week, same time.
Clearly not, and there are refreshments. So by all means, introduce yourself to people you have not met before this evening, and please continue to share. Oh, no, please.
If I would invite you to close in prayer with me, in whatever posture is comfortable for you or practice is comfortable for you. Holy and gracious God, we know by different names, different stories, different lessons in our lives, different communities, and still all created and beloved by you. God, we thank you for spaces like this in which we are called to together to sit side by side, to open our minds and our eyes and our hearts for the ways in which you continually reach out to us through the stories that we are familiar with and through new ideas and new people. God, we thank you for these collaborative opportunities where we not only foster our curiosity and compassion for one another, but relationships that build our whole community stronger. That at this time in our world, we need that more than ever. And we ask you to be a force of peace and justice, of an active engagement in our world. May you call us to do and equip us to do that which is truly yours, which is to love. Amen.
Amen. Please join us in the gallery.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.